The air burned like fire in his lungs. Ilya's cross woke to the sharp sting of iron dust against his face. He coughed, spitting crimson sand, his head pounding from the fall. For a long moment he lay still, listening. A strange, rhythmic roar pulsed through the ground beneath him like the beating of 1,000 drums deep inside the mountain. Above, a blood-red sky swirled with black clouds, and the jagged silhouette of Crimson Peak loomed like the fang of a beast. His chest heaved. The last thing he remembered was being dragged from his bunk aboard the freighter Orion's Grace. Men in armor, not human, but tall and broad-shouldered, with eyes like molten copper. He'd been shackled, beaten, and shoved into a drop pod. Then fire, re-entry, impact, and darkness. Now he was here, wherever here was. Ilias pushed himself up, his body screaming in protest. His left arm was stiff, scarred from an old wound back in the war, but he ignored the pain. Around him stretched an alien valley, a basin carved into the side of Crimson Peak. Rocks jutted like broken teeth, sharp and cruel. The ground was littered with bones, not all of them animal. A voice boomed overhead, carried on hidden speakers woven into the cliffs. "Run, human!" Ilias froze. The words were accented but clear, dripping with mockery. A ripple of laughter followed, dozens of voices, alien throats layered with static. "Run, pray!" He lifted his eyes. At the ridge above, shadowy figures lined the cliffs. Crimson hunters. Their armor gleamed in the red light, ornate plates etched with symbols of honor. Their helmets bristled with horns and ridges, their cloaks flowing like liquid fire in the wind. Each one carried a long-barreled weapon shaped from bone and steel. And they were watching him. Ilias' gut twisted. He knew what this was. He'd heard whispers back in the outer colonies, smuggler tales told over cheap whiskey, the Crimson Hunt, a blood sport. The Crimson clans captured outsiders, humans, reptilians, even their rival species, and released them into this valley. The prey ran, fought, survived as long as they could, until they were cut down. Ilias spat into the dust. Figures. He wasn't a soldier anymore, not officially. He'd left that life after Corin's fall, after too many bodies piled up under his command. He'd traded his rifle for a mechanic's spanner, fixing freighters for credits. But the war never left him. And now, it seemed, the universe wasn't finished with him either. A horn blasted from the cliffs, a deep bellow that vibrated through stone and bone alike. The hunt had begun. Ilias ran. His boots pounded against the crimson earth as he darted between jagged spires. Blaster fire rained down, scorching the rocks where he had been seconds earlier. He didn't dare look back. The hunters were fast, far faster than humans, and their weapons could vaporize him with a direct hit. But Ilias wasn't trying to outrun them. He was searching. His eyes scanned the terrain as he moved. Broken wreckage, shattered bones, strange growths of obsidian-like crystal, anything he could use. Years of combat and survival training whispered in his head. Terrain is a weapon always. He ducked into a narrow ravine, chest heaving. The air smelled of metal and ozone. Heat radiated from the rocks as if the mountain itself burned from within. He crouched low, forcing his breath quiet. The hunters' voices echoed through the canyon. Small steps, light prints. Prey hides. Prey dies. Their language was guttural, but the translation implants in his ear picked up fragments. They were toying with him, drawing it out. Good, that gave him time. He pulled a shard of crystal from the rock wall. Its edge sliced his palm instantly, sharp as glass, harder than steel. He wrapped it in a strip torn from his shirt, fashioning a crude blade. Not much, but better than nothing. Footsteps crunched above him. Ilias pressed against the rock, heart hammering. A shadow passed across the ravine, massive and armored. A hunter leaned over the edge, scanning with a device that hissed and clicked. The red glow swept across the canyon. Ilias held his breath. The glow passed on. The hunter snarled and moved away. Ilias exhaled slowly, gripping his makeshift knife tighter. He needed a plan. He needed. Human. The voice was soft, urgent, and far too close. Ilias spun, blade raised. His eyes met something he didn't expect. Not a hunter. A figure crouched in the shadows at the end of the ravine. Tall, lithe, cloaked in rough gray cloth. Not human, but not armored like the Crimson Hunters either. Her skin shimmered faintly in the dim light, a pale lavender hue, her eyes wide and luminous. She raised her hands in peace. If you want to live, follow me. Ilias froze, every instinct screamed trap, but something in her voice, desperation, not malice. Why should I trust you? He hissed. Another blast scorched the canyon wall above them, showering sparks. The hunters were closing in. She glanced upward, fear flashing in her eyes. Because, she whispered, they'll kill us both if you don't. She turned and slipped deeper into the shadows, vanishing behind a curtain of rock. Ilias cursed under his breath. He could stay, face the hunters, die on his feet, or he could gamble on a stranger. And he wasn't done gambling yet. He followed. The passage narrowed, forcing him to crawl. The heat grew more intense, waves of sulfur and ash filling the air. The woman moved ahead with uncanny grace, her cloak blending with the shadows. Finally, the tunnel widened into a hidden cavern. Pools of glowing liquid bubbled in the stone floor, casting eerie light. The air was cooler here, almost breathable. Ilias straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. His eyes fixed on the alien woman as she removed her hood. Her hair was white as snow, falling to her shoulders, her features sharp but not cruel. "You're not Crimson," Ilias said. "No," she replied, her voice steady now. "My name is Saris. My clan once lived here before the Crimson took everything. Now I help those they hunt when I can." Ilias studied her carefully. Her eyes met his without flinching. She wasn't lying, or at least she believed her own words. "Why?" he asked finally. "Why risk it?" Her gaze flicked to the mark on her wrist, a faint scar shaped like the sigil he'd seen on the hunter's armor. "Because once I was hunted too." Before Ilias could reply, the cavern shook violently. Dust rained from the ceiling. A horn blast echoed down the tunnels, so loud it rattled his teeth. Saris's eyes widened in horror. "They know you're here." Ilias gritted his teeth, clutching his crude crystal blade. He glanced at her, then at the tunnel behind. The hunters would be on them any second. "You wanted me to follow you," he muttered. "Now what?" Saris drew a slender blade from beneath her cloak, its edge humming faintly with energy. She met his gaze, her expression grim. "Now we run," she said, "but not away, up." Ilias frowned. "Up where?" "The only place they won't expect us to go," she answered. "Into Crimson Peak itself." The cavern shook again, louder this time. From the shadows of the tunnel, alien growls echoed, deep, guttural, and hungry. The hunters were here. Saris grabbed his arm, pulling him toward a spiraling passage that wound upward into the burning mountain. Ilias stumbled after her, the mark on his palm still bleeding from the crystal cut, the echoes of alien laughter closing in behind him. For the first time since the hunt began, he realized something chilling. The hunters weren't just chasing him. They were driving him. Right where they wanted. They climbed into heat and shadow. Saris moved like smoke through the spiral passage, always one step ahead, always choosing the narrowest cut, the darkest bend. Ilias followed close, one hand on the wall to steady himself, the other gripping his wrapped crystal blade. His palm still bled under the cloth. The air tasted like metal and ash. "Breathe slow," Saris said without looking back. "The vents cough when the belly of the mountain turns. If you breathe fast, you choke." "How do you know all this?" Ilias asked. "I grew up here," she said. "Not in the hunt, but under it." They passed a crack that opened briefly to a shaft of red daylight. Ilias peered out and saw the valley below, the jagged teeth of rock, the black parade of hunters moving along the ridges, and above them thin-winged drones circling like carrion birds. Horns bellowed. The sound shivered the stone beneath his boots. "Why drive us up?" Ilias said. "There's nothing to hunt on a peak." "There is spectacle," Saris said, "and the high winds carry the screams." He looked at her. She did not flinch. They moved again. The floor changed from dust to fused glass. Heat radiated like a furnace through the soles of his boots. Ilias tore a strip from his shirt and tied it across his face. Sweat stung his eyes. He heard a faint clicking near the ceiling like insects. "Drones," Saris whispered, pulling him under a shelf of rock. "They sniff for heat and scent." She slid a hand into her cloak and brought out a small stone disc carved with strange grooves. She pressed it to the rock, and the grooves filled with a pale blue glow. Cold washed over the air around them. The drone's red eye slid past, paused, then drifted on. "What was that?" Ilias breathed. "Veil shard," Saris said. "Old craft. My people learned to cheat the mountain before the Crimson stole the trick." Ilias filed the word away. Tools mattered, tricks mattered more. When the drone was gone, he eased out and studied the wall where the drone had skimmed too low. Its wing had nicked a cluster of black mineral nodules stuck to the stone like barnacles. One cracked open. Inside, thin wires of silver gleamed, wet with some clear sap. "What are those?" "Skymite clutches," Sarah said. "They drink heat, their shells grow around anything they touch." Elias plucked 2 nodules free and tested them between finger and thumb. The shells were hard but brittle. The filaments inside stretched and snapped with a tiny spark. Piezoelectric, he thought. Pressure makes current. He didn't need the word, he needed the spark. He tucked the clutches into his belt. "Can you make me a cord?" Saris tore a strip from the hem of her cloak without complaint. Elias twisted it tight, anchored a shard of crystal in a loop, and tied a simple sling. He had used one as a boy on the scrapyard moons, flinging bolts at rats. The memory steadied his hands. They climbed again. Heat flared. A vent opened above them with a roar like a dragon's breath, spewing steam and sulfur. Elias pressed his makeshift mask tighter and squinted through the white. "Here," Sarah said, dragging him into a side chamber. A pool glowed dimly on the floor, cool blue light pulsing like a heartbeat. Above it, moss threaded across the ceiling, pale as milk. "Drink," she said, "not much." Elias knelt, cupped a handful to his lips. The water was shock cold and carried a faint sweetness that wiped the ash from his tongue. He noticed Saris did not drink until he lowered his hands and stepped back. He offered his cupped palms. "Your turn." She hesitated, then leaned in and drank. Her shoulders lowered. Some of the tightness left her face. He pulled a dirty rag from his pocket, the last clean corner of his shirt, and wrapped it around her wrist where the skin was raw under the cloak. She looked down, surprised. "Humans are strange," she said. "We keep each other alive," he said. Her eyes flicked to his, something soft moving behind the luminous pupils. Then her face closed again. "We move. There is a place where we can watch without being seen. You must see what the hunt is." They took a narrow chimney that forced them sideways, then belly down, then sideways again until Elias' shoulders scraped and his breath came in shallow gasps. They emerged on a black ledge the size of a table. The wind hit hard, thin, and cold. Far below, the mountain opened into a bowl of stone. An amphitheater. Tier after tier of rock seats, packed shoulder to shoulder with armored figures, flowed down to a flat circle carved into the mountain's heart. Tall banners snapped from spears around the rim, each painted with the same symbol, a vertical slash crossed by 3 bars. Crimson, the clan mark he had seen on every hunter's chest. Horns blared. The sound rolled up and out into the bleeding sky. The crowd answered with a chant, 3 beats pounded with spear butts and fists, then a single word roaring up the bowl. "Run." Spears, fists, run. Spears, fists, run. Elias' stomach turned. On a stone plinth at the center of the circle, bound to a metal pillar, knelt a human. He was thin, his hair matted with dust and blood, his eyes swollen nearly shut. The pillar was ringed with coils that hummed faintly. "Who is he?" Elias whispered. Saris's jaw worked. "A miner from the caravans, one of yours. He fought when they took him. They made sport of that." "We can reach him," Elias said, already counting distances, paths, patrols. "We use the vents. You hide me under a veil shard. I cut the binds and—" "No," Saris's voice was sharp, almost panicked. "You cannot. This is the right of echoes. No one leaves the circle but the dead." "He's one of mine." "He will die one of theirs," Sarah said, voice low. "That is the point." Down in the circle, a figure walked out alone. His armor was unlike the others, deeper red edges blackened as if kissed by fire, the plates etched with 1,000 tiny cuts. A long cloak dragged behind, catching grit. He carried no rifle. On his hip, a long blade hung in a bone scabbard. His helmet was open. His skin was slate gray, his eyes molten copper like the rest, but colder, cruel. "The Huntmaster," Sarah said, "Carrick Thane." Elias felt hate rise like bile. The name meant nothing to him, but the man did. Carrick's chin lifted. He spread his hands to the crowd, taking in their roar like rain. He spoke in a rolling growl. The translator in Elias' ear fumbled, then caught up. "Echoes of crimson," Carrick said, "hear the mountain's hunger." The crowd answered with a single beat of fists. "Honor grows in struggle, purity grows in pain, strength grows in the blood of the unworthy." Another beat, another roar. Carrick gestured to the bound human. "Pray that fights is a lesson, pray that begs is a memory, pray that dies well honors us, pray that dies poorly feeds the ash." He drew the blade from his hip with a hiss like a serpent. It sang against the air. Elias swallowed hard. "What are the coils?" he asked. "The pillar holds him upright when the blade touches," Sarah said. "The coils make him sing." "Scream," Elias said. "Sing," Saras repeated, dead-eyed. Elias scanned the edges of the arena. Guards stood in pairs behind each tier, spears grounded. Drones hovered like flies, no blind spot, no gap. "Unless you make one." He looked up. The wind roared over the lip of the amphitheater, strong enough to flay skin on a bad day. He watched it curl and break on the air like water on rocks. He looked down at the vents spaced around the rim, thin slits with sulfur updrafts. He looked at the skymite clutches in his belt, the brittle shells and sparking threads. "Give me one more veil shard," he said. "I have two," Sarah said. "If I give you one, I cannot shield us both." "Then keep them both," Elias said. "I'll make noise." She stared. "Noise kills here." He met her gaze. "I'm not walking away while one of mine sings for them." Saras's throat moved. She reached into her cloak and pulled out a tiny bone needle. "If we make noise, we must make it smarter than theirs," she said. She pricked her own finger and drew a quick sign on the stone with her blood, 3 spirals inside a broken circle. "The mountain listens, trick it." She pressed the needle into his palm. It stung. Elias grunted. "That do anything?" "No," Sarah said, "but now you're one of us for 9 breaths. That helps me feel brave." "Works for me," Elias said, and slid away along the ledge. He moved like he had in too many cities on too many wars, flat to the stone, timing each shift to the surge of the crowd. The ledge angled toward one of the vents. Sulfur licked his face. He crouched, pried 2 skymite clutches apart right over the vent mouth, and layered fibers across the slit, weaving a fragile net. "Come on," he whispered. He pressed crystal shards into the mesh until it looked like a black scab. Then he took the 3rd clutch, pressed it hard between his palms until it cracked, and the silver thread snapped with a bright blue spark. The vent coughed. The spark fell. The world barked like a cannon. The vent belched a jet of white steam and black grit straight up. The shock wave slapped the banners flat and tumbled 3 drones out of the air. The crowd flinched as one. Every helmet turned to the blast. Elias was already moving. He slid along the rim, rolled under the lip, and dropped onto a narrow relief 6 meters below. The stone burned his palms. He swore, scrambled, then swung his sling. He fed it a small crystal and snapped the cord toward a drone. The shard punched into the eye. The drone whined and crashed into a guard 2 tiers down. The guard stumbled. Spears wavered. A gap. Elias dropped to the next relief and then the next, teeth clenched, ribs shrieking. The arena floor rushed up. Carrick was still standing over the bound man, blade raised, the coils humming louder now, louder like a swarm. Elias hit the ground. The impact drove air from his lungs. He rolled, came up on one knee, and threw his wrapped blade. It spun clean and true. It cut the coil harness at the human's chest. Sparks jumped. The hum stuttered. Carrick's head snapped toward Elias. Elias was running before the eyes found him. He hit the pillar, grabbed the bound man under the arm, and heaved. The coils still held the man upright by the waist and legs. The man's eyes fluttered. He tried to speak. Blood bubbled. "Hold," Elias said. He dug his fingers into the coil cables, found the lock pins, and wrenched. The pins wouldn't budge. He slammed his shoulder into the pillar. It groaned, but the bonds held. Boots thundered behind him. Saras's cloak flashed in his side vision. She had come down after all. She landed in a low slide beside him, bone needle between her fingers. She jammed it into a recess at the base of the coil and twisted. The coil spat blue light and loosened a fraction. Elias tore, metal screamed. The second coil gave. He looked up and saw Carrick 3 strides away. Carrick moved like a storm. His blade rose. Sarah stepped between them without thinking. The blade would have taken her head, but she ducked and the edge clipped her hood and sliced air instead of bone. She pivoted and drew her humming knife and met Carrick's second strike. The clash rang through Elias' teeth. Sparks spun. Sarah slid back 2 steps, breath ripping in and out. Carrick smiled without joy. "Traitor's whelp," he said. The words hit Saras like a slap. Elias saw it even if he didn't understand. "Get him free," she hissed. Elias grabbed the final coil. The lock pin wouldn't move. He wrapped both hands, planted both feet, and hauled like a man trying to pull down a tree. His vision went white. Something tore in his shoulder. The coil shrieked and gave. The bound man sagged forward into Elias' arms. He was lighter than he should have been. "Can you stand?" Elias said. The man's cracked lips moved, sound scraped out. Mara. Elias froze. He knew that name. Mara Quinn, captain of the Orion's Grace, the one who had given him a second chance after he left the war. The one who had argued with the Crimson Boarders when they came in the night. The one who had been dragged away first. "Where is she?" Elias asked. His voice was not his own. The miner's eyes focused for a heartbeat. He lifted a trembling hand and pointed across the arena. Elias followed the line. A second pillar stood in shadow at the far edge. A second human knelt bound to it. Even across the circle, he knew the set of those shoulders, the stubborn lift of that jaw. "Marat." His vision narrowed. The world went quiet. Carrick's blade slashed again. Saris blocked again, but barely. The edge kissed her forearm and burned a line. She hissed and fell back a step. Drones began to right themselves. Spears lowered. Guards advanced. "Up," Elias snarled at the miner. He pushed the man toward the ring of shadow at the base of the stands. "Crawl, don't stop, don't look back." The miner stumbled away, a broken puppet. "Saris," Elias said, "can you?" She read his eyes and did not waste breath. "No," she said, "not today." He moved anyway. He ran straight for the second pillar. The crowd gasped, a wave moving across the tiers. Guards surged. Carrick turned his head, saw where Elias was going, and laughed. "Run, human," he said softly. "Stop," Saris shouted, voice cracking with something more than fear. Elias sprinted. The ring between pillars was slick with black sand and gray ash. Drones swooped. He threw crystal at one, it popped and fell. Two more dipped low, their underslung weapons whining. He dove as twin bolts seared the air where he had been. Heat cuffed his back. He rolled and came up running. 15 steps. 10. He could see Mara's face now, blood on her lip, eyes open and steady, proud even here. "Elias," she mouthed. He thought he heard her through the roar. "I'm here," he said, though there was no way she could hear. 5 steps. Something punched his thigh. He stumbled, caught himself. A spear had grazed him and drawn a line of fire. He lunged and slammed into the pillar. The coils hummed cold against his hands. He reached for the lock pin. A long shadow fell across him. Carrick stood at his shoulder, close enough that Elias smelled the leather of his gloves and the strange spice of his skin. The huntmaster did not raise his blade. He calmly put its point to the stone between Elias' boots. "If you pull," Carrick said, voice a blade of its own, "I cut." Elias met those copper eyes. In them he saw a man who believed in nothing but his own story. He had seen that face on human generals and pirate kings. He had served under it. He had quit because of it. Elias bared his teeth. "Then cut me." Carrick's mouth tilted. "Not you." He moved faster than thought. The blade flashed. The flat of the sword slammed into Elias' wrist. Numbness burst up his arm. His fingers let go of the coil lock. He reached again. Carrick stepped past, quick and small, and drove the pommel of the hilt into Elias' ribs. Light exploded in his chest. His knees went loose. Saris hit Carrick from the side like a thrown spear. Her knife bit under his shoulder plate and sparked against something hard. Carrick pivoted and hammered his elbow into her ribs. Air left her in a sob. She dropped to one knee and braced on her blade. "Traitor's whelp," Carrick said again, colder. "Your mother taught you to disgrace our name well." Saris's eyes flared. "My mother taught me mercy." "Then she failed you," Carrick said. He turned back to Mara. Mara watched Elias with a look he had seen once before, in a burning corridor on Corin's Fall when she had held a door while his squad ran through. She had smiled then too. The same smile, proud, sad, fierce. "Don't," Elias croaked. He could not hear his voice. "Don't do this." Carrick lifted the blade, slow for the crowd to see, slow for the drones to catch the light along the edge. The amphitheater held its breath. Even the wind seemed to pause. Mara dragged in air around the coil at her throat. She forced the words through blood and wire. "Run," she whispered, "and make it cost." The blade fell. The scream never came. Elias' mind braced for the sound, for the coils to make her sing, as Saris had called it, for the mountain to echo her agony. But what came instead was silence. Too much silence. Carrick's blade had stopped an inch from Mara's throat. The edge hovered, trembling faintly. Not from the huntmaster's strength, but from something else, something pulsing beneath the steel. The mark on Ilias' palm burned. It flared through the cloth binding, light bleeding across his fingers, blue against the crimson glow of the arena. Karek's weapon shook, the hum of the coils faltered, and the entire amphitheater gasped as one. The Regent's mark. The word hissed through the crowd like wind through a graveyard. Ilias didn't know what it meant, but the Crimson did. They recoiled, even Karek. For the first time since the hunt began, Ilias saw doubt on the Huntmaster's face. Mara's eyes widened. She looked at his hand, then at him, and something like hope flickered in her gaze. But it was brief, snuffed out when Karek snarled and drove his blade down again, forcing his will through whatever force resisted him. This time the sword bit. Not Mara. Ceres. She had hurled herself sideways, knocking the blade's edge from its course. It slashed across her shoulder, carving through cloak and flesh. She cried out but kept her feet, knife raised, defiance burning in her eyes. "Run, Ilias," she shouted, blood soaking her sleeve. Karek roared, his voice shaking the amphitheater. The crowd surged to its feet, horns blaring, weapons pounding in unison. The spectacle was slipping, chaos, and chaos dishonored the hunt. Guards rushed the circle. Drones swarmed, their eyes glowing red. Spears leveled at Ilias from every direction. Ilias hauled himself upright, ribs screaming from the blow earlier. His vision blurred, but one truth blazed clear. Mara was still bound. Ceres was bleeding. Karek was ready to finish it. And the hunters wanted a show. Fine, he'd give them one. He ripped the cloth from his palm. The mark glowed brighter, etching swirling lines across his skin like liquid fire. He thrust it toward the nearest drone. The machine spasmed midair, its optics flickering, then dropped smoking to the ground. The crowd howled, fear and awe tangled into one. Ilias grabbed the lock pin of Mara's coil and yanked. The mechanism shrieked, resisted, then cracked open as if forced by unseen hands. Blue light spilled from the wound in the metal. The sigils on his palm pulsed in rhythm with it. Mara slumped forward, gasping. Ilias caught her, ignoring the guards closing in. "We're not done," he muttered. She rasped a laugh, weak but steady. "You never are." Spears jabbed closer. One nicked Ilias' arm, another grazed his thigh. He shoved Mara behind him, lifted his crystal shard blade, and braced for the wall of iron descending. Then the mountain itself roared. A vent near the arena rim erupted, belching fire and smoke. A shockwave tore through the tiers, scattering hunters like dry leaves. More vents answered in a chain reaction, steam hissing, stone cracking. Crimson Peak was waking. Ceres staggered to Ilias' side, clutching her bleeding shoulder. "The mark," she gasped. "You've stirred it, the peak remembers." "I don't care who remembers," Ilias growled. "We're getting out." He slung Mara's arm over his shoulder and nodded to Ceres. "Lead the way." She hesitated, her face pale with blood loss, then set her jaw and pointed toward a shadowed tunnel at the far end of the arena. There, old vent shafts, too narrow for armor. "Move." They ran. The crowd erupted behind them, horns blaring in fury. Guards surged forward, but the vents kept exploding, belching steam that blinded and burned. Ilias shoved through the chaos, half-carrying Mara, Ceres limping at his side. Drones tried to track them, but shorted out when they locked on his glowing hand. They reached the tunnel, a jagged wound in the stone, and dove inside. Spears clattered off the mouth behind them, but none dared follow. The passage was too tight, too unstable. Darkness swallowed them. Only the glow of the mark lit their way. Mara coughed, leaning heavy on him. "You shouldn't have come for me." "Yeah, well," Ilias said between breaths, "you'd have done the same." Her weak smile confirmed it. Ceres moved ahead, her knife drawn despite her wound. The tunnel bent sharply upward, the air hot and thin. "These shafts run to the outer slopes," she said. "If we survive the climb, there's a way out." "And if we do?" Ilias asked. "Then we die where the Crimson can't watch," Ceres said flatly. That was enough. They climbed in silence, broken only by their ragged breathing and the distant rumble of the mountain. Every few meters, Ilias' strength faltered under Mara's weight, but he forced his body onward. One more step, one more breath, always forward. At last, faint moonlight appeared ahead. A thin slit opened into the cold night air. Ceres squeezed through first, then helped Ilias drag Mara out. They emerged onto a narrow ledge high above the valley. The wind whipped hard, carrying the stench of smoke and blood from below. The amphitheater was a chaos of light and fire, crimson hunters scrambling like ants across broken stone. For the first time since the hunt began, Elias let himself breathe. Then a horn bellowed from the cliffs above them. Figures emerged from the shadows, armored shapes descending the slope. Not guards, not drones, something worse. Carrick's bloodhounds, lean, four-legged beasts with obsidian hides and mouths lined with jagged teeth. Their eyes glowed faint copper, and their claws clicked against the stone as they fanned out, blocking the ledge. Saris swore under her breath, "They've loosed the hounds." Myra tightened her grip on Elias' arm. "You can't fight those." Elias raised his shard blade anyway. "We'll see." The first hound crouched low, lips peeling back from its fangs. The wind carried its growl straight through his bones. And then, with a sudden lunge, it leapt. The bloodhound's leap was pure violence. Elias barely had time to shove Myra aside before the beast crashed into him. Obsidian claws scraped across his chest, sparks flying as they raked against the crystal shard he thrust upward in blind instinct. The blade cut deep into the hound's throat. A torrent of hot black ichor sprayed across his face. The creature howled, thrashing, before tumbling over the ledge into the abyss. Another was already on him. Saris threw her humming knife. The blade buried itself into the beast's side, sizzling against hide. The hound shrieked and twisted, snapping its jaws toward her. Saris grabbed a broken stone and slammed it into the knife's hilt, forcing it deeper. The creature convulsed and dropped, legs twitching. But there were more. 6 of them, their glowing copper eyes surrounding the ledge. Mara leaned heavily against the cliff wall, weak but defiant. "Elias, there's too many." "Then we even the odds," Elias gritted, pulling the skymite clutches from his belt. He cracked one in his palm until the silver filaments sparked, then hurled it at the nearest hound. The brittle shell shattered on impact. Sparks crawled over the beast's hide, searing nerves. It yelped and stumbled, rolling into the path of another. Both went tumbling down the slope in a snarl of teeth and claws. The ledge shook. Rocks cascaded into the void below. They had seconds at most before the entire shelf gave way. "Saris," Elias barked, "where?" She glanced up the cliff, eyes narrowed in calculation. A dark fissure gaped above them, a wound in the mountain's side. "There, vent shaft." "How do we reach it?" Elias demanded. Her bleeding shoulder trembled as she reached into her cloak, pulling free another of the strange carved stones. She hurled it against the cliff face. The grooves lit blue, and the rock beneath it fractured, forming a jagged path upward. "Climb," she shouted. Elias hauled Mara onto his back, ignoring the agony in his ribs, and started scrambling up the unstable holds. Saris followed, her knife clenched in her teeth, blood dripping down her arm. The hounds leapt after them, claws raking stone, snapping jaws inches from Elias' heels. One lunged high, catching his boot. Elias kicked hard, his balance faltering, stones clattering into the abyss. For a terrifying heartbeat, they teetered. Then Saris jammed her knife into the hound's eye, yanking Elias upward with her free hand. The fissure yawned above them. Elias shoved Myra inside, then pulled Saris through. The tunnel closed in darkness around them. The hounds howled outside, scratching at the rock, but none dared enter. Something in the vent's breath, cold, sulphurous, laced with unseen power, kept them at bay. For a moment there was only silence. The 3 of them collapsed, gasping. Elias pressed a hand against Saris's wound. Blood seeped hot through his fingers. "We need to stop this bleeding." She hissed but didn't push him away. "There's no stopping it, not without a healer's kit. We don't have one." Myra, voice raw, rasped, "Then we improvise." Elias searched the fissure walls. Strange moss grew there, pale and faintly glowing. He tore some free, crushed it in his palms, and felt it release a slick, cooling gel. Carefully, he packed it against Saris's shoulder, then tore another strip of his shirt to bind it. Saris shivered, but her breathing steadied. "Human tricks," she murmured. "Not tricks," Elias said. "Survival, big difference." She studied him in silence, then looked away. The fissure sloped upward into the heart of Crimson Peak. The air grew hotter, denser, filled with the distant rumble of shifting stone. They moved slowly, Elias supporting both Saris and Mara, their footsteps echoing like ghosts. At last the tunnel opened into a vast hollow chamber, a natural cathedral carved by the mountain's fury. Stalagmites rose like black fangs, while rivers of molten rock pulsed through cracks in the floor. The heat was suffocating. Ceres sank against a stone column, exhaustion dragging at her limbs. This place it is forbidden. Why? Elias asked. Her luminous eyes flicked toward the molten flows. Because this is where crimson was born. Elias frowned. You mean your hunters? She shook her head weakly. No, the clan, long before they wore armor, long before they claimed honor through blood, my people lived in these halls. We sang with the mountain, carved paths, raised children. Then crimson rose. They declared themselves chosen, strongest, purest. They made the hunt their creed and slaughtered all who would not join. Her voice cracked, the weight of memory pressing down. My mother refused them. She believed mercy was not weakness. They called her a traitor. They killed her. They marked me with her shame. She pulled her cloak aside, revealing the faint scar on her wrist. The same sigil Elias had seen on every crimson hunter, but hers was burned in crooked, cruel, a brand of dishonor. Elias' jaw clenched. So that's why they call you traitor's whelp. Ceres nodded. I live only because my father bent knee to crimson. He trained me in secret to survive, to strike where they cannot see. I swore I would never serve them. Myra, slumped against the wall, studied Ceres with weary eyes. So why risk yourself for us? Why not hide, keep your head down? Ceres met Elias' gaze, her eyes fierce despite the pain. Because you fight the way she did. Your compassion is a blade sharper than theirs, and it terrifies them. The chamber shuddered, cutting off any response. A deep roar thundered through the mountain. The molten rivers surged, cracks widening, dust rained from the ceiling. Myra struggled to her feet. They're coming. They won't let us vanish into their holy ground. Elias grabbed his sling, slipping a shard of crystal into the loop. Then we don't vanish. From the far side of the chamber, armor glinted in the molten glow. Dozens of crimson hunters, led by Carrick himself, emerging like wraiths from the smoke. His copper eyes locked on Elias. Run, human, he called, voice rolling like thunder. Run into the peak, but know this, there is no mercy here, only the hunt. The hunters fanned out, weapons raised, the chamber closing like a trap. Elias glanced at Ceres and Mara, then at the glowing mark still etched into his palm. His heart pounded, but his jaw set like iron. Then let's give them a hunt they won't forget. The cavern became a storm of fire and steel. Elias hurled a shard with his sling. It cracked against a hunter's visor, sending the armored giant staggering backward into molten spray. Ceres darted to the side, her blade glowing faintly as she cut through the gap in another's armor, moving with the speed of someone raised in shadow. Mara stayed behind them, clutching a broken spear she had scavenged from the cavern floor, her breath shallow but eyes sharp. The hunters pressed in, their weapons hummed, discharges lighting the chamber with deadly arcs. Elias ducked one blast, feeling the heat sear the back of his neck. He spun, grabbed a loose rock, and slammed it into the control node of a hunter's shoulder plate. Sparks erupted. The armor locked, the giant collapsing stiff to the ground. Carrick's voice cut through the chaos like a whip. Do not kill the human. Elias froze for half a heartbeat. Why not? That moment of hesitation cost him. A hunter's gauntlet smashed into his ribs. The world spun and his back slammed against stone. He gasped, the air ripped from his lungs. His sling tumbled from his fingers. Ceres screamed his name, but 3 hunters dragged her down, pinning her arms. Mara swung her spear wildly, jabbing at anything that came close. But she was too weak. One blow knocked her flat. Elias tried to rise, but iron hands clamped around his wrists, twisting them behind his back. Shackles clamped tight. His vision blurred as they dragged him across the chamber floor, past molten rivers and smoking corpses. Carrick stood waiting at the far side, cloak dragging in the ash, copper eyes blazing. His blade dripped with molten heat, but his face was calm, triumphant. Enough, the huntmaster said. The hunters froze, their prisoners struggling against unbreakable grips. Carrick stepped close, his gaze fixed on Elias. The mark chose you, but it does not matter. You are still prey. And now, he raised his voice so it carried to every soldier in the chamber. You will be paraded. Chains, shackles, darkness. They were marched through winding tunnels deeper into the peak. Torches flickered in sconces carved from obsidian. The walls were etched with runes, prayers to strength, blood, and fire. At last, they emerged into another vast chamber. This one was no natural cavern. It was a fortress. Spikes of bone and metal jutted from the walls. Red banners hung heavy, embroidered with the crimson mark. An iron cage dominated the center, its bars fused from scavenged starship hulls, its floor littered with bones. The prisoners were thrown inside. Elias hit the ground hard, shoulders screaming. Saris crumpled beside him, still bleeding. Mara fell to her knees, too exhausted to stand. The gate slammed shut. Hunters ringed the cage, their armor gleaming in the torchlight. Above them, on a raised platform, Carrick addressed the crowd. "Behold," he roared, "the human who defies death, the traitor's whelp who carries shame, and the woman who led weaklings into our sky. These are your champions, Crimson. This is what the clans will see." Elias' chest heaved. He looked around the chamber and froze. They weren't alone. Other cages lined the walls. Inside, he saw dozens of figures, reptilian traders, insected scavengers, even other humans. Prisoners from raids, all broken, all silent. Their eyes followed Elias with hollow despair. Saris whispered bitterly, "They collect us, not for mercy, for theater." Carrick gestured to the cages. "The hunt feeds more than our blades. It feeds our pride. It shows every world that Crimson is strong, that Crimson decides who lives and who dies. Without the hunt, there is no fear. Without fear, there is no obedience." The crowd roared approval. Elias' gut twisted. The hunt wasn't just sport. It was propaganda, a machine of control. Every execution, every scream broadcast through the stars. To keep the Crimson's rivals broken. To keep rebellion drowned in terror. Carrick turned his gaze back to the cage. His copper eyes met Elias. "And you, human, you will be our greatest spectacle yet. Tomorrow the clans will gather on the slopes of Crimson Peak. They will watch you run again, and they will watch you fail." The crowd pounded their spears, chanting, "Run, run, run." Elias clenched his fists around the shackles. His mark pulsed faintly, hidden under the iron. But it was weak, dormant. He needed something, heat, current, chaos, to wake it again. Mara leaned against him, her voice ragged. "You can't outlast all of them, you know that." "I don't need to outlast all of them," Elias whispered back. "Just enough to make them bleed." That night the fortress quieted. The hunters dispersed to feast and drink. Only a handful remained on watch. In the cage, Elias sat with his back against the bars, breathing slow, eyes half closed. He was thinking, calculating. Sarah stirred beside him. "You plan to escape." "Of course." "You cannot. The bars are fused steel. The guards never sleep. And even if you did escape, Crimson Peak stretches for days in every direction." "Maybe," Elias said, "but steel breaks, guards bleed. And mountains," he raised his branded hand, the faint blue glow flickering like an ember. "Mountains remember." Saris watched him for a long time, her luminous eyes unreadable. Then she leaned closer, lowering her voice. "If you do this, you cannot do it alone. The prisoners here, some hate Crimson as I do. If you give them a spark, they will follow." Elias' jaw tightened. He looked at the cages again, dozens of eyes staring back at him. Hollow, defeated, but not dead, not yet. "They don't need hope," he said. "They need anger." Saris's lips curved in a faint, grim smile. "That human you have in abundance." Hours later, the fortress shook with the drunken roars of hunters celebrating. The guards at the cage grew lazy, their spears resting on the ground. One leaned against the bars, muttering curses. Elias' eyes opened. The mark on his palm pulsed. He shifted closer to the bars, pressing his hand against the iron. Heat surged. Sparks crawled across the metal. The guard jerked upright, staring down. "What?" The bar exploded. Blue light ripped through the iron, shattering it into molten fragments. The guard screamed as shards seared his flesh. Prisoners across the chamber gasped. Elias rose, the mark blazing on his palm like fire. He grabbed the guard's fallen spear and turned to the others. "Get up," he barked, his voice echoing in the silence. "No more running, no more cages. Tonight we hunt them." The prisoners stirred. For the first time, their hollow eyes sparked with something dangerous. The crowd's chant still echoed in Elias' skull. "Run, run, run." He bared his teeth. "Fine," he muttered, "but this time they'll be the ones running." The fortress of Crimson Peak was never silent again. The first guard's scream carried through the halls, echoing like a war cry. Elias ripped the spear free from his twitching body and snapped it in half. He tossed one end to Mara, who caught it with a grim nod, and handed the other to Saris, her blood-stained shoulder forgotten in the firelight. Now Elias growled. The prisoners answered. Chains clattered, cages rattled, voices rose in defiance. Elias slammed his glowing palm against another cage's lock. Blue fire surged, the bars warping until they snapped like brittle bone. A massive reptilian trader burst free, his scales scarred, his fists like hammers. With a guttural roar, he tore the head from the nearest guard. The chamber erupted. Dozens of prisoners poured out, overwhelming the handful of guards left behind. The hunters fought fiercely, their armor gleaming, but they were unprepared for chaos. Spears fell. Knives flashed. The crimson chants of "run" turned to screams. Elias fought like a man with nothing left to lose. Every strike was precise, brutal, efficient. He drove the jagged spear through one hunter's knee joint, ripped it free, then slammed it across another's visor until the glass cracked. The mark on his palm pulsed brighter with each kill, feeding on the storm. "Forward," he shouted. "Don't stop until the gates fall." The rebellion swept through the fortress like wildfire. Corridors became killing grounds. Prisoners swarmed patrols, dragging them into side tunnels and beating them silent. Saris led small bands of fighters, teaching them how to target weak joints in the hunter's armor. Mara, still weak, leaned on her broken spear but directed prisoners with sharp commands, her voice carrying authority from years as a captain. Elias pushed toward the central hall. The great iron doors loomed ahead, the final barrier between them and the open slopes. But they were barred shut, glowing faint with defensive wards. Carrick waited there. He stood alone, cloak spread, blade gleaming. His copper eyes burned with a fury that outshone even the torches. "You dare," the huntmaster snarled, his voice echoing through the carnage. "You dare defile Crimson's halls with chaos." Elias stepped forward, spear in one hand, his marked palm glowing in the other. His ribs ached, his body screamed, but his voice was steady. "You built this place on fear. Tonight it burns." Carrick's laugh was cold and sharp. "You think rebellion matters? You are nothing but spectacle. Even now the clans watch. Every moment is broadcast across the stars. They see you struggle. They see you fail." Elias' jaw tightened. "Then I'll show them something they don't expect." He raised his hand. The mark flared. The iron doors behind Carrick groaned, their wards flickering. Shock rippled through the hunters still alive in the hall. Carrick's smile vanished. His blade rose. "Then come, human, die in front of your audience." The duel was fire and thunder. Carrick moved with terrifying speed, his blade singing arcs of molten light. Elias blocked with his spear, the impact jarring down his bones, sparks exploding as metal clashed. He ducked low, swept Carrick's legs, but the huntmaster twisted midair, landing with inhuman grace. "Too slow," Carrick barked, slashing again. The edge caught Elias' shoulder. Pain seared white-hot. He staggered, blood soaking his shirt. But instead of falling, he shoved his glowing palm into the wound. The mark burned the bleeding shut. The smell of scorched flesh filled the hall. Elias roared through the pain, driving forward again. Around them, the battle raged. Prisoners clashed with hunters, the fortress trembling from the weight of their fury. Saris gutted one enemy, then hurled her knife into another's throat. Mara rallied a group of freed captives to flank, driving the hunters toward Elias and Carrick's duel. Every eye turned to the fight. The clans watching from afar, the prisoners, the hunters, it all funneled into this single clash. Carrick pressed harder, his blade a storm of red light. Elias' spear shattered under the onslaught. He barely rolled aside as the huntmaster's strike split the stone where he had stood. "You are prey," Carrick thundered. "No mark, no mercy, no rebellion changes that. Crimson is eternal." Elias panted, blood dripping from his jaw. His eyes flicked to the shattered spear in his hand, then to the molten cracks running through the floor. "Maybe Crimson is eternal," Elias said hoarsely. "But you're just a man with a sword." He slammed his glowing palm into the molten fissure. The ground erupted. Flames roared upward, molten rock spewing across the hall. Hunters screamed as lava splashed their armor, melting through steel. The fortress shook violently, cracks spiderwebbing across the ceiling. Carrick staggered, cloak ablaze, but his blade still gleamed. "You fool," he hissed. "You'll bury us all." "Good," Elias growled. They clashed again, this time on a floor splitting beneath them. Every strike rang like thunder. Elias fought with desperation, his marked hand glowing brighter with each swing. Sparks flew. Stone crumbled. The fortress collapsed piece by piece around them. At last, Carrick lunged for the killing blow. Elias caught the blade with his bare, branded hand. The steel screeched against glowing flesh, sparks exploding. Carek's eyes widened in disbelief as the mark flared, burning through the sword itself. The blade shattered. Ilias roared and drove the jagged haft straight into Carek's chest. The Huntmaster gasped, copper eyes going wide, blood bubbling on his lips. "Run," Ilias spat, twisting the blade. "That's all you're good for." He shoved Carek backward into the molten fissure. The Huntmaster's scream echoed once, then was swallowed by the fire. The hall erupted into chaos. The iron gates groaned, their wards collapsing. Prisoners surged forward, slamming them open. Cold night air rushed in, carrying ash and freedom. But Ilias didn't see it. He dropped to one knee, blood pouring from too many wounds. The mark on his palm dimmed, flickering like a dying ember. Mara and Saris caught him before he fell. Their faces blurred in his vision, voices muffled under the roar of the collapsing fortress. "You did it," Mara whispered. "You killed him." Saris shook her head fiercely. "No, he killed himself on his pride." Ilias tried to speak, but his throat filled with copper. His vision narrowed to darkness. The last thing he felt was their hands gripping his shoulders, refusing to let go. The world was fire and shadow. Ilias drifted in and out of consciousness, pulled between pain and silence. He saw flashes, the fortress walls collapsing in showers of molten rock, the prisoners rushing out into the night, Mara's hand gripping his shirt to keep him from being trampled, Saris's pale eyes burning with desperate focus as she dragged his weight across blackened stone. Then darkness. When light returned, it was gentler. Moonlight, cold and silver, filtered through drifting ash. Ilias lay on a slope of jagged rock, his body bound with makeshift bandages. His chest rose shallow, each breath a knife. Mara knelt beside him, her face streaked with soot, her voice rough but steady. "You're not dying here," she whispered. "Not after everything." Saris crouched nearby, her cloak torn, her wound bound with moss. She watched the horizon where the fortress still burned, a pillar of smoke climbing into the stars. Hunters fled in every direction, broken and leaderless. Freed prisoners huddled together on the slopes, waiting for dawn. Ilias stirred, eyes fluttering open. "We make it." Mara pressed a hand to his shoulder. "You broke their leader, you broke the hunt. They'll remember this night." Saris's gaze snapped to him. Her voice was quiet but sharp with conviction. "No, they'll fear this night." Ilias tried to sit, but pain lanced through his ribs. He gritted his teeth. "Fear's a start, but not enough." "What do you mean?" Mara asked. He pointed weakly to the burning fortress. "Crimson will tell this their way, say the Huntmaster fell to treachery, to lies, they'll spin it to keep control." His eyes burned with fatting strength. "Someone has to tell it right." The prisoners stirred, murmuring in a dozen tongues. Insected clicks, reptilian growls, human whispers. Their eyes turned toward Ilias, toward the scarred, bleeding figure who had stood against the Huntmaster. Hope flickered there, fragile but real. Saris rose to her feet, her cloak snapping in the wind. "Then we make the mountains speak louder than their lies." She strode to the jagged peak above them. With a cry that echoed off the cliffs, she raised her blood-stained knife to the sky. The prisoners roared in answer, their voices carrying across the valley, a chorus of defiance. The hunt of Crimson Peak was broken. But victory was not peace. Dawn painted the world in iron gray. The fortress was rubble, its iron banners scattered like broken wings. Mara sat with Ilias, her hand tight on his, refusing to let him slip away. His breaths were shallow but steady now, the mark on his palm glowing faintly, pulsing in rhythm with his heart. Saris stood at the edge of the camp, speaking to the freed prisoners. She told them what Crimson had done, how the hunt was never strength, only fear. How the mark had chosen Ilias not because of blood, but because of adaptation, compassion, defiance. The words spread quickly, carried on whispers, then on shouts. By midday, the mountain slopes rang with chants, not of Crimson, but of freedom. Mara leaned close to Ilias' ear. "They'll follow you." He forced a grim smile. "I didn't come here to lead anyone." "You don't get to choose," she said softly. Saris returned, her eyes steady but softer now. "The clans will come. They will want blood for this. If you stay, they will kill you. If you leave, they will hunt you forever." Ilias exhaled slowly. "Story of my life." But Saris shook her head. "Not forever. Not if others hear what happened here. If the story spreads, the hunt dies. Crimson dies." The mark on his palm pulsed, brighter now, as if agreeing. Elias stared at the strange sigil burned into his flesh, at the weight it carried and the power it demanded. Finally, he nodded. Then we make sure the story lives. By nightfall, the rebellion had scattered into the valleys, taking fragments of the truth with them. Elias, Mara, and Saris watched the last of the fires die from a ridge above. The sky was full of ash and stars. Mara leaned against him, her voice quiet. So what now? Elias looked at Saris. She met his gaze, the faint scar on her wrist visible in the moonlight. Now, Elias said, we build something better, and we start by surviving. Saris's lips curved in the faintest smile. Survival, human, that at least we can do together. They turned from the ruin of Crimson Peak, 3 shadows against the burning horizon, carrying a story that would spread across worlds. A story of a human who refused to run. A story of defiance. A story of freedom,